And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, the estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back to 80/20 estate planning with our guests, Norris Wright and Tom Forrest, trust experts, and today we are talking about trust. Norris, let's talk a little bit about trustees. We've seen the different kinds of things that people can put in trusts and want managed and so forth. The trustee position sounds very important. Can you talk a little bit about that to us?
Yes, so the trustee is literally the manager of the fund for all purposes. So if there's a fund, a trust fund created, then the trustee has all the powers of a person who actually owns that fund to carry out the purposes of the trust. Now, the trustee's job is, of course, not to benefit himself or herself, but to benefit the beneficiaries as described in the trust agreement. But the trustee must determine what the purposes of the trust are and invest the assets accordingly to try to meet those purposes in a reasonable way. It must be prudent in their investments, must take into consideration all kinds of investments and the income, the cash flow that's needed. Needs to look at the longevity of the trust. Is it just for the life of one person, or is it to go on for future generations? And what distributions or discretion does the trustee have in deciding when to distribute principal in accordance with the trust document? So the trustee owes its duties to the beneficiaries and is held to a pretty high standard of carrying them out. Having said that, there are some trusts that just aren't quite big enough for bank trustees. I mean, bank trustees are there for forever, and so you generally would look to them to handle trusts that are going to go for a long term or have substantial assets. But sometimes they're smaller trusts for whatever reason, and family members, they may say they wish their own family members to be trustee. And when an individual is a trustee, there's all kinds of questions that arise as to whether that individual will actually take on the responsibility of carrying out all these responsibilities and get proper advice. They can hire attorneys and accountants and can actually engage the services of a bank to assist them on whatever agreed upon compensation they choose. But the individual trustee then has the responsibility of carrying out the trust. And there is some exposure if they do it inappropriately. So people need to identify who in the family might do that. Is it reasonable to assume they will carry it out, and does that person actually want to take on that responsibility?
And perhaps if the person knew all the things that were involved, might not.
If they're going to use a family member as the first or second trustee, that we at least have a corporate trustee down there so that when the family members wake up and realize that it's a very tough job, that they can all just resign and have a corporate trustee take over, and again, avoid the necessity of going to court to have that done.
Now, Norris, so size is one issue. Complexity, I guess the trust agreement is another issue.
Very much so.
So do you have a preference? Do you like individual trustees? Do you like corporate trustees? Do you ever do co-trustees, individuals and corporate trustees?
Yes, we do co-trustees. On the other hand, in Delaware, the laws are very much encouraging, the trust laws are very much encouraged the use of what we call advisors, so that an individual family member, you could have a corporate trustee and have an individual family member or members named as advisors. So they don't have the mantle of trustee. They don't have the same powers, and they don't have the same duties or liabilities. So you can identify certain family members to consult with the trustee with respect to investments or with respect to distributions, as Tom mentioned earlier. And you can identify and restrict these responsibilities of family members, but leaving the overall responsibility on the corporate trustee with the assistance of these advisors. So that's a good in-between that we often use.
Tom, U.S. Trust obviously is one of the big names in the trust industry and is really a fine institution. Why don't you give us some reasons for having a corporate trustee?
All right, Al, I think one of the most important reasons...
I thought you might like that question, Tom.
One of the most important reasons is really the impartiality. For example, a trust often, I'm not talking about a living trust, a grantor trust, but once they become irrevocable, for example, at death, or it creates a credit shoulder trust, and Norris talked about earlier with that federal exemption amount. You have heir rev trust. The trustee has to represent two parties, the income beneficiary and the descendant of the trustor or whoever else is succeeding to that trust property. So we have to look after, as a corporate trustee, both interests. Now, what does that mean? Well, if the income beneficiary comes to me and says, I need more income, can you please get me as much income as possible, go 100% bonds? Well, if we bought 100% bonds 10 years later, there was no growth in that trust, what are the remainder men going to do? They're going to be upset that their trust didn't grow. So we have to look after both parties. If you have a family member as a individual trustee, they're not often aware of this. And they might, if they're the trustee for their parents' trust, for example, and they need more income, they're going to get them more income without looking at the grandchildren or who's ever succeeding to the property. Another example I'll give is the corporate trustee is there to step in all cases. The individual trustee might not be around. I'll give you one example that I was aware of. A beneficiary for an heir rev trust was ill. He got rushed to the hospital. The family members decided they needed to put that individual into a home. They needed the deposit and money, but they could not find the individual trustee. He was on a 2-week cruise. A corporate trustee has an entire team available. Even though the trust administrator could be on vacation, there's a trust assistant or an estate planner or a financial planner or somebody else at that corporate trustee that's familiar with that account that can step in and provide the funds. So that one situation that I was aware of turned out to be a reason for them to immediately go to a corporate trustee.
Well, it sounds like there are some real good reasons to have corporate trustees or having the ability to work with other family members. Big issue. We're not going to solve the problem today, but one that people really need to think about as they put together their estate plans. And we should mention the Delaware. Norris, you talked about this ability to have advisors in place along, for example, with the corporate trustee. Delaware is really a state that is one of the leading states in trust law and are very progressive and often set the standard or right out there in front of other states in the country. Would you agree with that?
Yes, Delaware, the legislature has seen the value in making sure that if there are changes in the laws governing trusts in Delaware that are necessary for the betterment of the trustees and the beneficiaries, that they will address those proposed changes from time to time. And we also have an excellent court of chancery, which has some very experienced judges who handle these types of cases very, very well. So we have a good history of trust laws here in Delaware, and they create a steady platform for trust in Delaware.
Before we get off this trustee issue, the protector that you talked about earlier, are you seeing more of that, Norris, in practice?
Yes, but we see it because of the increasing use of what we call perpetual or dynasty trusts, which go from generation to generation. Delaware permits that now, and so people recognize that they can't see too far into the future, so they need to have somebody there who can make some reasonable amendments to the trust to keep up with the changes in tax laws and other laws.
I want to come back to that after the break and talk about those dynasty trusts and also talk about some of the tax reasons that people put these together. So right after the break, we'll be back talking about that.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at Al Gibbons at algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940. Or email algibbons at algibbons.com.
Hey, Mary, it's a great day outside. Would you like to go for a bike ride?
Bike ride? Not really. I'm too tired. And besides, there's a really good show on TV today.
Now that I think about it, I'm all beat myself. I've been working since early this morning.
Does this sound like you or someone you know? Then you need to look into Bioline. Bioline is a Chinese herbal nutritional supplement designed to help increase your energy, lose those extra pounds, and cleanse your system of those energy-robbing toxins. Used by championship sports teams and respected physicians alike, Bioline is what you need to feel and look your absolute best. For more information on Bioline or to place an order, please call toll-free 1-888-211-7895 or go to www.ubhealthy2.com. Bioline is endorsed by well-known celebrities like Reba McEntire, NBA star Glenn Rice, and NFL greats like Mike Shepard and Rod Bernstein. Used by over 1 million people worldwide, Bioline is published in the prestigious Physician's Desk reference for non-prescription drugs and is used by over 6,000 physicians nationwide, as well as recommended to their patients. That number again for more information or to order Bioline is 1-888-211-7895 or go to www.ubhealthy2.com. That's letters ubhealthy2.com. Try Bioline because without your help, you've got nothing.
You're listening to Southern New England's Talk Alternative, offering the most elite program, 990 WALE Renaissance Radio.
And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back to 80/20 estate planning and our discussion of trusts. Tom, we often think of trusts in order to save us, the purpose being saving us estate taxes. What if there is no estate tax? Do we still need trusts?
That's an excellent question and very relevant today, Al. Trusts are not, like I mentioned earlier, are not specifically a tax-structured vehicle only. There's a lot of non-tax reasons to create trusts. For example, investment management, professional investment management inside a trust vehicle without a trust and controlled in an environment such as a trustee, where will your children's inheritance end up if it goes outright? Here, at least you're protected. You know your children will have something. That's great strategy. Non-tax reasons control. They always say, can you control your assets from the grave? Well, yes, you can in a way, because a trust is so flexible. You can put all the terms into a trust to go on forever. And in a vehicle such as a dynasty trust that Norris might jump in on, talk about dynasty trust in a couple minutes. Distribution of assets. A trust can be an excellent vehicle to use for future distributions such as education, health, maintenance, or whatever terms the grantor or settler may create, and again, in lieu of having assets going outright to heirs. Trust can be created in tax-advantaged states such as Delaware. So the growth of those trust assets can be more so than your home state because you won't have fiduciary income tax. This is not available in all such state residents, but most beneficiaries or grantors in certain states can create trust in other jurisdictions to take advantage of state income taxes, not estate taxes. Again, the probate issue, reduced overall probate costs is there. There's some asset protections for spendthrift trusts, for example. The peace of mind that the grantor or settler can know that those assets will continue for children and or grandchildren without being subject to claims of some of the other creditors. There's still reasons if the estate tax would be repealed to create charitable trust. You have minor children. Trusts are going to be extremely important. Confidentiality issues if you want to have trusts in certain jurisdictions that can continue forever. And I think I mentioned Dynasty Trust was Norris. Why don't we talk a real briefly about a Dynasty Trust?
Well, the Dynasty Trust is a concept that's not new, but the name for it is probably new. It's a way of having assets held through generation to generation and only providing limited distributions in the trustee's discretion over the years, so that if I leave assets in trust for my children's generation, then at their death it would go on to my grandchildren, and then at my grandchildren's death it would go on to great-grandchildren, and so on. The idea was to keep those assets from being taxed in each generation as it goes down, to keep it from being subject to the estate tax. The government back in the 80s, Congress stuck in something called a generation skipping tax, which made it a severe limitation on the ability to do that and not pay a generation skipping tax on it, which is a flat 55% tax on assets that pass more than one generation without being includable in an estate. Don't want to get into too much of how technical all that is, but the point is that you can still fund a Dynasty Trust with $1 million at your death using a $1 million exemption for generation skipping purposes, and still have it kept through generations without being subject to the estate tax.
Right, and Norris, the reason I had you explain that, because I know the topic was non-tax reasons, I wanted you to go through that because I had an individual come into my office to talk about trust, and let's just say his name for purpose of this is Mr. Galakowitz, because he had a very unique last name. He had 2 daughters. They both got married, and he was talking about his name is off the face of the earth, gone. I said, why don't you create the Galakowitz Family Trust and make it a Dynasty Trust going forever? That way your name will always be here, because his 2 daughters were remarried with new names. He said, what a great idea. And he created the Galakowitz Family Trust. Now, that wasn't his real name, but...
That is a great story, though. And it just seems, Tom, you've probably given us 10 reasons for the non-tax reasons of having trusts. The last being very important, yet one inexperienced people would never think of. So, I mean, that really is good. Any other non-tax reasons that you can think of?
Well, I'd like to jump in with one comment to stress something that Tom mentioned in his list, and that is creditors. And if assets are held, a Dynasty Trust, even if we did away with estate taxes, people might want to use or consider something like a Dynasty Trust, because creditors cannot take assets from a properly drawn trust to the extent the person, the obligor, the person they're seeking to get to satisfy the obligation from, is not the one who put the money in the trust. So if I put money in trust for my children and grandchildren, et cetera, and they have creditors, they cannot take my descendants' rights to that trust. They cannot take that. So if it's a properly drawn, what we call a spendthrift trust with the proper protections in there. And people say, well, maybe my children or grandchildren won't have creditors because they'll be good with money, but creditors also, the category also includes spouses. So that if there are bad marriages throughout, the spouses cannot force out any of those assets that are held in a properly drawn trust in the future. And that's a very important issue to many people.
Norris, you mentioned 2 or 3 times as you were talking there about properly drawn trusts. This takes expertise, doesn't it?
Yes, the trusts are very complex, and people complain about how long they are, but all the language in these trusts, almost all of it has a purpose. Unless some of the provisions in there, for instance, a spendthrift provision I just referred to, unless that's in there, the people may not have the viability of these trusts that they're really seeking.
Let's come back on the other side of the break, and let's talk about putting these together and sort of the expense involved in doing that, and talk about some of the details. Right back after the break.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 estate plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes. From A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com.
Hey, Mary, it's a great day outside. Would you like to go for a bike ride?
Bike ride? Not really. I'm too tired. And besides, there's a really good show on TV today.
Now that I think about it, I'm well peed myself. I've been working since early this morning.
Does this sound like you or someone you know? Then you need to look into Bioline. Bioline is a Chinese herbal nutritional supplement designed to help increase your energy, lose those extra pounds, and cleanse your system of those energy-robbing toxins. Used by championship sports teams and respected physicians alike, Bioline is what you need to feel and look your absolute best. For more information on Bioline or to place an order, please call toll-free 1-888-211-7895 or go to www.ubhealthy2.com. Bioline is endorsed by well-known celebrities like Reba McEntire, NBA star Glenn Rice, and NFL greats like Mike Shepard and Rod Bernstein. Used by over 1 million people worldwide, Bioline is published in the prestigious Physician's Desk for reference for non-prescription drugs and is used by over 6,000 physicians nationwide, as well as recommended to their patients. That number again for more information or to order Bioline is 1-888-211-7895 or go to www.ubhealthy2.com. That's letters ubhealthy2.com. Try Bioline because without your help, you've got nothing.
You're listening to Southern New England's Talk Alternative, offering the most unique program, 990 WALE Renaissance Radio.
And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back to 80/20 Estate Planning. I want to thank my guests for being with us today, Tom Forrest and Norris Wright, both from the state of Delaware. We were talking about the complexity of trusts, the sophistication of these vehicles, the expertise in order to make sure they're properly drawn, as you mentioned, Norris. And I just want to really say something from my perspective as a member of the estate planning team, and that is I've seen clients over the years who are afraid of these vehicles. They're sort of intimidated by them. And I think what we've said today is that's not necessary. They do the things that we want them to do. They make happen what our dreams are for our families and so forth. And I want to add that there are a lot of clients who perceive these vehicles to be expensive, or they have to have millions and millions and millions of dollars before they have trust. And that is absolutely not true. The cost of these vehicles compared to the value that they bring to our clients is minute. And every expert estate planning attorney will be recommending trust to these clients in the future. Also, Tom, I think it's very important to have the right estate planning team together. Not just the lawyer, but also the investment person, the trust officer, the life insurance professional, the accountant. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's extremely important, is working in the team and making sure the client's advisors are all kept in the loop. You want to make sure that everyone is aware of the estate plan, because if you don't go to a professional, competent attorney or CPA or trust professional or estate planner, everyone who's been in this business has seen and have heard about the nightmares that have been out there, which is really what is scaring some of these public, that they're not sure about trust, because there have been some misconceptions because of not using professional estate planning.
So I think the bottom line is you use experts.
Correct.
What have we forgotten today, Norris?
Well, I think we've covered an awful lot. One thing that I was going to mention and forgot to earlier about using revocable trusts is we use those sometimes also to transfer ownership of vacation homes and things that are outside the jurisdiction where you live. We have a lot of clients who have properties maybe up in New England or down in Florida, and if we put them in the name of the revocable trust, they don't have to go through what they call ancillary probate there in those areas, and it streamlines the administration of the estate quite a bit, and it's quite simple to do.
So it's quite important then, if you have properties in various states, that you consider these vehicles.
Yes, you should consider them in relation to the whole plan. That's correct.
Okay, that's great. I want to sum up what we've talked about today. We have had a really great discussion on trust, and Norris Wright and Tom Forrest, thanks very much for being here with us. I also want to thank Phoenix Home Life, our sponsor, a great life insurance company, very experienced in wealth management. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Norris. Thank you, Phoenix. And looking forward to seeing you next week, Tuesday, 4 to 5 p.m.
Thank you for listening to 80/20 Estate Planning with your host, Al Gibbons. You can tune in to our live broadcast every Tuesday at 4 p.m. If you would like to contact Al Gibbons, you may email him at algibbons@algibbons.com or mail your questions and comments to AEG Financial Services, The Commons at Valley Forge, 1288 Valley Forge Road, number 53, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, 19460-2681. Please join us again next week.